Hi, my name's Phil. I like talking about politics, and in this video I'd like to discuss the disgraceful way the Met Police conducted themselves yet again in acting like the jackbooted lickspittles of the far-right extremists instead of serving their communities. And although they were using new laws to arrest peaceful protesters in London yesterday, they know they're on the wrong side of this because they've been coming up with the most ridiculous excuses to justify their heavy-handed and duplicitous actions. I think we're now past the time when the Met needs disbanding and either replaced with a normal police force or for us to have a complete reform and have a national police force instead. I just don't think the Met can rescue their reputations after this. They've been given too many chances and they just get worse. But first, if you'd like to be notified of daily news and politics, please subscribe to the channel. So for those who don't know, we had a coronation yesterday. As people may know, I'm a monarchist, but not interested in the pomp and pageantry that goes with it. I wasn't in favour of a large coronation at all. In fact, given that the loudest voices in favour of the event all seem to agree that the highlight was the leader of the House of Commons, Penny Mordaunt, holding a sword upright was the highlight, I think I'm going to have to say, if that is the highlight, probably wasn't worth £250 million, was it? Especially during a cost of living crisis. But despite the Twitter echo chamber, most people in the country essentially enjoyed the event, as evidenced by, well, if you actually go out and about, you can see it, but as evidenced by the fact it's been all over the paper for days. But if you're going to have a huge, expensive ceremony for what could have been done in a much more low-key way, then you are going to expect protesters. If you make it a major event, then people who wish to protest against that event are, of course, going to turn up. The Conservatives promised to be champions of freedom of expression in their 2019 manifesto. That was a manifesto promise, and they have broken it. People wanting to stand holding a placard doesn't say Republic or Not My King. They are no more disruptive than someone standing in roughly the same place draped in a Union flag cloak. They're both there. They're both attracting attention, but they're both just expressing their views. In fact, the ones peacefully holding placards actually had police permission as well. The person draped in a Union flag just turned up. The pro-Republican protesters, they didn't just descend menacingly onto the Capitol. They discussed their protest with the Met Police well in advance and got agreement. Their protest was not only lawful, but pre-approved. Then, as they were setting up on the day, they were immediately arrested. And although, they justify this through the use of, the Public Order Act now, you see there's this new law rushed through Parliament in a clear, incoherent mess. The Met Police know there's no justifying this. How do I know? Because they lied. They put out a statement during the day in which they alluded to intelligence, which is always a bit of an oxymoron when the Met's concerned, suggesting that the protest wasn't going to be peaceful at all. Now, with the possible exception of one or two, you always get some who go a bit far, the protest was absolutely going to be completely peaceful. The vast majority of them just going to stand there with a placard. That was it. Maybe a bit of chanting. That was it. The main protest group, Republic, does not have a history of violent protest. And that the police had to lie about this violent conspiracy tells you that they had no chance of justifying their actions by telling the truth. And here is what I would say as well to people who actually believe in the monarchy but support the police here. The monarchy will end and it will be your fault. I've done videos in the past where I've explained the constitutional benefits of monarchy over elected heads of state. Yes, I've said there needs to be some reforms, but the basic idea of a constitutional monarchy, I think, is much better than an elected head of state. But you don't see those arguments in the mainstream media. They make no attempt to use them. And that is because the loudest pro-monarchy voices choose not the lectern, but the iron fist to win their arguments. Because it's lazier, it's easier, and they have the ability to do it. But I saw someone asking why the young, for example, was so against monarchy this weekend. Why do you think? Think about what the events of the last few days have looked like to young people. What have young people seen of the monarchy this weekend? They've seen a grotesque display of wealth during a cost of living crisis that they are feeling the keenest, and the authorities brutally cleansing the streets of any visible sign of alternate views, because that's all someone holding a placard is. The placards weren't personally offensive. They weren't inciting hatred. They were just a message, a political message. And that message was not allowed to be seen. That's what the young have seen. Why on earth would young people want to support that? Just as Brexit will ultimately be destroyed by the Brexiteers, Ireland will reunify because of the action of unionists, and the monarchy will fall because of the actions of monarchists. In fact, whenever there's any political idea where the champions of it choose bullying over mutually respectful persuasion, that idea will always die. Nobody wants to support an oppressive regime unless they are gaining out of it. And oppressive regimes can only ever benefit a small proportion of the population. This is why they always fall in the end. And the more oppressive they are, the quicker they fall. As for the Met Police, they're done as far as I'm concerned. The only question is what to do about them. Can't obviously have no police. You know, there are two main schools of thought, I gather. The first is to remove their specialist units, have those separate, and then just have a London police force working in exactly the same way as normal county police forces. But the second is to have a national police force. You know, there was an incident last week which provided some support for this. So as people may know, I certainly talked about it, Boris Johnson filmed himself breaking the law by not having a seatbelt on in a moving vehicle. No question about it, law broken, he's filmed it. It's easy. However, you may think to yourself, well, what are the police doing about it? Well, you can only report it to the police force that's active in the area where he broke the law. Only they can investigate. So where was he? That's the question. Where was he? He was talking about Derbyshire. The implication was, well, was he in Derbyshire? But Derbyshire police have said there's no evidence he was in their county, so they're not going to do anything. Which is actually a bit of a cop-out, because you should at least interview him and say, were you in Derbyshire? Basically, Johnson will get away with this as long as people cannot pinpoint where he was. Because it has to be the police force in that area that investigates, not another one. We don't have a national one to do it. But if we had a national police force, it wouldn't matter where he was. He would be investigated because he was certainly somewhere in the country. And if there was doubt as to whether he was in England or Wales or Scotland, because those would still be separate, then they could, I mean, that's just two police forces then investigating. That doesn't expend too many resources. It's not like having dozens of police forces all investigating because it could have been in their area. But whatever happens, it would now be folly for the Mets to continue in their current form. They're not reformable. They've clearly been unfit for purpose for decades. But every time there's another report, rather than progress, it doesn't even show progress. You know, it's not even like it says, well, there's progress, it's just not enough. It's regress. It gets worse. When I was young, they were officially classed as institutionally racist. Not just people saying it. Report formally accepted by Parliament cited them as institutionally racist. So that was official. Now they're officially classed as institutionally racist, misogynistic and homophobic. This is not going in the right direction. They have a recent history of brutally cracking down on peaceful protests of certain causes, but allowing much more disruptive and sometimes even violent protests for causes that the far right approve of. I would argue that even if the Met was now completely reformed and actually started policing in the interest of the community, not a few politicians with extremist views, it would still not be enough. I mean, how many times do you see a far-right protest group shouting in the faces of police officers, and the police officers, they form a chain to stop them getting somewhere they shouldn't, but they ultimately do nothing. And yet here they were yesterday, arresting young men and women particularly, who were just wanting to stand there with a placard for which the police had already agreed they could. It's young people looking at that as well, middle-aged people looking at that as well, and going, this isn't right. You know, they're not going to believe, after so many decades of it getting worse, they're not going to believe that just changing the leader is going to make it all right again. You know, I just think the level of mistrust is now too high. Scrap them, rebuild a completely different police force for London. The Met are irredeemable at this point. They are literally covering for rapists and murderers within their own ranks, yet arresting those who peacefully protest against those crimes as well as other causes. The problems with the Met have persisted and gotten worse. Consider this, because this isn't even just the latest Conservative government. These problems have persisted throughout the leadership of different senior police officers, different mayors of London, different Westminster governments. Doesn't matter who's in charge of the government or London or the Met Police, the problems don't get any better. You put someone else in place, go, this must be dealt with, and we've got a plan to deal with it. Gets worse. At this point, the problem is not inside the Met. The problem is not some structure of the Met. The problem clearly is the Met. But there we are. Those are my thoughts. Let me know yours in the comments below. Hope you found the video interesting. If you did, please click the like button. And if you'd like to support the channel further, the join button for memberships. And until next time, I'll see you later.